Have you noticed this? The harder you try to think your way to an answer, the more tangled your mind becomes. Not because you think too much, but because you're trying to control things that were never under your control to begin with. This video is not here to comfort you. No soothing, no telling you that everything will be okay. In the next 20 minutes, we'll look straight at overthinking through a Stoic lens, where you don't need reassurance, only clarity. If you're stuck inside your own thoughts, stay. Maybe you don't need to think more. Maybe you just need to understand that you're thinking in the wrong place. Welcome to Zen Mind, and thank you for spending your time here. 1. Why overthinking is not your flaw. You may have thought that you're weak, that something is wrong inside your mind, that no normal person thinks so much that they exhaust themselves like this. But the truth is, overthinking is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of a mind trying to do more than it was ever meant to do. Overthinking doesn't happen because you think too much, but because you want certainty about things that can never be certain. You want to know the outcome in advance, to make sure you won't be wrong, won't get hurt, won't fail. And when the world refuses to give you clear answers, the mind starts spinning to create them on its own. The human brain wasn't designed to see the future. It was designed to respond to the present, to detect immediate danger, to make quick decisions, to survive. When you force it to predict every possible outcome, you're asking it to do something that goes against its natural function. You call it thinking things through. But in reality, it's a desperate attempt to achieve total control. You want to know what will happen if you say this, if you choose that path, if everything goes off plan. And when no answer feels certain enough, you keep thinking and thinking again. The irony is, the more you think, the more powerless you feel. Because deep down, you know that no amount of thinking can make the future obey your will. Yet you don't stop, because stopping means accepting uncertainty. The Stoics called this the greatest human mistake, trying to control what lies outside your control. Not because they were naive, but because they understood the limits of the human mind. They knew that suffering doesn't come from events, but from our attempt to manipulate their outcomes. When you overthink, you're not really searching for solutions. You're searching for safety. You're hoping that if you think long enough, carefully enough, risk will disappear. But risk doesn't disappear through thinking. It's only postponed by anxiety. You don't worry because you're too sensitive. You worry because you believe everything must be within your grasp for you to feel at ease. And the world doesn't work that way. It always keeps a portion of chaos, a portion of uncertainty, no matter how well you prepare. There's a moment every overthinker knows well, when you're mentally exhausted, yet feel no lighter than before. That's not because you haven't thought enough. It's because you've been thinking in the wrong place from the very beginning. You're using thought to solve emotion. You're using analysis to fight fear. But fear isn't dissolved by adding more hypotheses. It softens only when you understand what you're responsible for and what you need to let go of. Stoicism doesn't teach you to stop thinking. It teaches you to place thinking where it belongs. Think about what you can do, and stop where control no longer exists, no matter how much more you think. When you try to think through every possibility, you create an endless task for the mind. Because possibilities never end. There will always be another worse scenario, another mistake, another unknown. And right there, overthinking becomes a trap. It convinces you that you're being proactive, when in truth, you're being pulled along by the fear of losing control. You're not leading your thoughts. They're leading you. If you look closely, overthinking isn't excessive thinking. It's thinking without boundaries. No clear line between what belongs to you and what doesn't. And when everything is dragged into your mind has no space left to breathe. So the problem isn't the intensity of your thinking, it's the direction of it. You're not thinking too much. You're thinking in the wrong place. 2. The Stoic division: what is and isn't in your control. Stoics see the world in a way that feels cold, but also sharply clear. They don't try to make things comfortable. They try to put things in their proper place. And from the very beginning, they divide life into two separate zones: No overlap, no compromise. The first zone is what's within your reach, how you think, how you respond, the choices you make right now, your attitude toward what happens. Not much, but enough for you to live responsibly with yourself. The second zone is everything else, other people's thoughts, final outcomes, the world's reactions, the timing of change, things that arrive late, early, or never arrive at all. And the Stoics say it plainly, this zone does not belong to you. The problem is, most of us don't live by this division. We pull everything into one place. We believe that if we're careful enough, if we worry far enough ahead, if we analyze deeply enough, that boundary will disappear. But it doesn't. It only overloads the mind. Overthinking doesn't begin when you think. It begins when you pour most of your mental energy into the second zone. You guess what others think of you. You imagine endless scenarios that haven't happened. You try to live ahead of time in a future that doesn't exist. You lie in bed, the lights are off, but your mind is wide awake. Not because there's work left to do, but because you're trapped in questions with no answers. Are they judging me? Will the outcome match what I hope for? Will everything go completely wrong? What exhausts you isn't thinking itself. It's the sense of helplessness that comes with it. You worry, but you can't act. You predict, but you can't intervene. You think you're controlling the situation, but in reality, you're only watching it unfold inside your head. Stoics don't call this being careful. They call it wasted inner strength. Because every minute spent on what's outside your control is a minute taken away from what truly belongs to you. You can't control what others think, but you can control whether your actions align with your values. You can't guarantee the outcome, but you can guarantee that you've done your part. The difference sounds small, but it's the line between clarity and exhaustion. When you know exactly what belongs to you, your thinking becomes sharp. When you don't, every thought turns into noise. Most overthinkers are deeply responsible people. They just take responsibility for things that were never theirs. They carry other people's emotions, future outcomes, and even possibilities that haven't happened. Stoicism doesn't tell you to ignore life. It tells you to ask the right question. Not how will this turn out, because that drags you into the blind zone. But what part of this belongs to me, because that brings you back to the present. The moment you ask the right question, the mind begins to feel lighter. Not because the problem disappears, but because you're no longer carrying the weight of the entire world. You keep only what you need to keep. You begin to see that many of your worries never asked you to solve them. They only asked you to accept that not everything is in your hands. And the paradox is this. When you stop trying to control what can't be controlled, you gain better control of yourself. Thoughts become cleaner, decisions become clearer, actions become decisive. Stoicism doesn't promise an easy life, but it gives you a mental map so you don't get lost in your own mind. 2 zones, 1 boundary, and a calm that comes from not stepping into what was never yours. 3. Ending overthinking through small, deliberate action. When you're trapped in overthinking, the most natural instinct is to think more. You believe that if you go deep enough, careful enough, clarity will eventually appear. But the Stoics look straight at this point and say the opposite. Clarity doesn't come from thinking. It comes from action. The human brain wasn't built to remain in a state of endless waiting. It needs signals of movement. When there is no action, thoughts begin to spin to fill the empty space. And that loop is overthinking. Stoicism doesn't ask you to stop worrying before you act. They understand that if you wait until the worry is gone, you'll never begin. Anxiety isn't something that disappears before action. It's something left behind by action. The problem is, when you overthink, you usually ask the wrong question. You ask what the right move is, the perfect move, the move that can't go wrong. And that question opens a maze with no exit, because perfectly right doesn't exist. So the Stoics change the question, simply. Not what to do perfectly, but what to do small. Not what is completely safe, but what carries the least risk. And most importantly, what can be started right now. A small action isn't meant to solve the whole problem. It only needs to be small enough to break the stillness. Because when you stay still too long, thinking takes over all the space in your mind. You overthink a message. You weigh every word, every tone, every way it might be misunderstood. Stoicism doesn't tell you to send it. It just tells you to open the chat, write a draft, and stop there. You overthink your work. You worry about doing it wrong, about starting and not being able to finish, about results not meeting expectations. Stoicism doesn't ask you to solve everything. It only asks you to open the file and write a title. You overthink the future. It feels vague, unstable, full of things you can't control. Stoicism doesn't advise long-term planning in that moment. It advises you to stand up, take a 5-minute walk, and leave your phone behind. These actions look tiny, almost meaningless, but they do something thinking never can. They bring you back to the present. And overthinking exists only inside assumptions. When you act, even in the smallest way, you send a clear signal to the brain. Something real is happening. Tension drops, not because the problem is solved, but because you're no longer stuck. The Stoics understood this. Humans don't need motivation to act. They need action to create motivation. Waiting to feel calm before acting is just a refined form of delay. Thought doesn't end itself with more thought. It only gives birth to another thought. And the more you think, the more convinced you become that you must think even more. That's the trap many intelligent people fall into. Action, on the other hand, has an endpoint. You complete one small task, and the mind gets a moment of rest. That moment is brief, but it's enough to breathe again. Stoicism doesn't teach you to act big, to act fast, or to get it right immediately. It teaches you not to stay still too long inside your own head, because stillness is when thinking starts to control you. And in the end, what cuts off overthinking isn't a smarter idea. It's a small movement, ordinary, real, human. Thought doesn't end with thought. It ends with action. 4. Why Stoics don't seek comfort, they accept discomfort. Most people believe that the ultimate goal of life is to feel at peace. They search for ways to soothe themselves, to stop worrying, to stop feeling anxious, to remove that heaviness in the chest. But the Stoics begin from a completely different assumption. Peace is not something to be pursued. Stoicism doesn't try to make emotions disappear. It doesn't treat anxiety as an enemy to be eliminated. It sees it as a natural state, one that appears when humans face uncertainty. And because of that, it doesn't fight it. Overthinking is born from a very deep fear, not fear of events, but fear of the feelings that come with them. You think excessively not to find solutions, but to avoid the disappointment if things don't go as you hoped. You analyze every possibility because you're afraid of pain. You replay scenarios in your head because you're afraid of being wrong. You want to prepare so thoroughly that you never have to face the feeling of having chosen incorrectly. But emotions don't work on preventive logic. You can't think ahead to become immune to disappointment. You can't calculate long enough to avoid pain. And the more you try to escape them, the more sensitive you become to them. The Stoics look directly at this and accept a cold truth. Worry will appear, anxiety will appear, and uncertainty will always exist in human life. The difference lies in how you treat these feelings. Most people try to erase them. Stoics let them be there, but they don't give them the power to control their actions. When you overthink, you're quietly assuming that you can't act while you're anxious. Stoics don't wait for ideal conditions. They act alongside anxiety, as if it were merely an unpleasant companion, not the one driving the car. You don't need to be calm before making a decision. You only need to be clear enough to understand that anxiety is not a stop signal, it's just a feeling. The more you try to stop worrying, the more closely you monitor every emotional shift. You start checking whether you're calm enough yet, certain enough yet. And that constant monitoring feeds overthinking. Stoics don't constantly check their emotions, they check their actions. They ask, what am I doing, instead of how do I feel? And that question changes the entire direction of the mind. When you stop aiming to feel comfortable, you often feel lighter. Not because discomfort disappears, but because you're no longer fighting it. Energy is no longer wasted on avoidance. There's a very real paradox. When you accept that you can act even without feeling at peace, overthinking begins to lose its ground. It no longer serves its old protective role. Anxiety may still be there. But it no longer controls your schedule, no longer delays your decisions, no longer keeps you trapped inside your head. Stoicism doesn't promise a gentle life. It offers a more mature choice. To live with discomfort instead of letting it decide how you live. And that choice is what slowly quiets the mind. 5. Living as if this moment is all you truly own. Marcus Aurelius once wrote a single brief line, one powerful enough to quiet a noisy mind. You could leave this life at any moment. Not to frighten you, but to remind you that the time you truly own is far less than you think. The Stoics don't use the idea of death to spread pessimism. They use it like a sharp blade, cutting straight through the invisible delay called overthinking. Because when you remember that everything is finite, many thoughts become unnecessary. Most overthinking comes from the illusion that you still have plenty of time to hesitate, that you can think a little more, weigh it one more time, wait until you feel more certain before deciding. But life doesn't move at the pace of your waiting. When Marcus Aurelius said you could leave this life at any moment, he wasn't telling you to rush. He was reminding you that the power to decide is not always in your hands. And because of that, every moment when you do have it matters. Overthinking makes you live as if you'll always have a chance to fix things. Fix your words, fix your choices, fix your path. But the Stoics knew that many moments pass only once, and hesitation is often the very thing that makes you lose them. If today were the last day you had the power to choose, you wouldn't spend it thinking about what you can't control. You wouldn't use it guessing how others might react. You would simply do what belongs to you. The idea of finiteness doesn't make Stoics despair. It makes them awake. It strips away circular thoughts that exist only because you forget time is limited. You don't overthink because the problem is too big. You overthink because you treat every decision as if it could stretch on forever. But when you place it in its final context, many worries fall away on their own. Stoics don't ask, is this choice perfect? They ask, if this were the last time I could choose, would I be willing to stand behind this decision? And that question alone ends many arguments in the mind. You begin to see that most of what keeps you awake isn't truly important. Not because it's small, but because it was never yours to control. And when time becomes precious, you stop wanting to waste it on what lies outside your reach. Living as if this were the last day you have the power to choose doesn't mean living dramatically. It means living in the right place, saying what needs to be said, doing what needs to be done, and accepting the rest. When you stop pretending you have unlimited time to think, overthinking loses its reason to exist. It no longer needs to protect you from the future, because you've returned to the present. You begin to act not because you're certain, but because you no longer want to postpone what belongs to you. And that action brings a kind of quiet very different from reassurance. Stoicism doesn't end with instructions on how to live. It leaves you with a truth strong enough to make you adjust on your own. Time doesn't wait for you to finish thinking. It waits only for you to live. Overthinking doesn't disappear because you understand it better. It disappears when you stop spending your time on what doesn't belong to you and live fully with what you truly have the power to choose. Overthinking doesn't disappear because you think more intelligently. It disappears when you stop trying to live on behalf of the future. You don't need to control every outcome. You only need to take responsibility for what belongs to you, your thoughts, your choices, and your actions right now. Everything else, no matter how much more you think about it, will still follow its own path. Stoicism doesn't promise you a mind that is always quiet. It offers you a way of living so the noise no longer controls you. If after this video you still feel anxious, that's completely normal. Just don't let that anxiety decide for you. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next Zen Mind video.